far is that in the Mishnah it talks about different stringencies of kachim over truma, and one of them was that if you have let's say a baking pan, and you have 10 loaves of bread in there, and as far as truma is concerned, if you touch, let's say you are a sheni, and you touch loaf of bread, that loaf of bread becomes the next generation, which is a shlishi, and that's it. It ends. The rest of the loaves of bread in the pan are pure, are tahar. But if it would have been kachim, let's say the loaves of bread belong to a carbon toida, if you touch one loaf of bread, let's say you're a sheni and you touch a loaf of bread, comes a shlishi, everything inside that pan is treated as if it's one unit, and everything there becomes tamei, a shlishi. Rab Chanin says it's not a chumra midrabanan, it's actually from the Torah, because it says kaf achas, 1 spoon. It's redundant. Kaf is singular. So kaf achas means that everything inside that spoon becomes like one unit. So the Gemara asks a question. It is it says that it says as follows, that when it comes to the water that and the ashes for a carbon for a para aduma, it says over there that if you touch, and we're very strict with that, but if you touch one part of the ashes, all the ashes become tamei if they're all sharing inside one keli. And that is definitely only midrabanan, because nowhere in the Torah does it say that. Even according to Rab Chanin, the pasuk is talking about kachim, sacrifices, or things to do with sacrifices, not to do with the paraduma. Then Rabbi Akiva says, I want to add to that law. The same thing applies to flour. The same thing applies to Torah's incense. The same thing applies to the frankincense you put by the loaves of bread, the lechem aponim, and the kol. If you touch one, then they all become puzzle. So it seems clearly that kachim, flour, and Torah's is only midrabanan, because he's adding it onto the case of the paradum. So we're asking a question of Chanan. So what you learned was, we answered that we're talking about a mincha that's only left over, and because the mincha is left over, it's not really, doesn't need any more the utensil because the carbon powder is done. Therefore, we don't combine and make it one unit. But if it's only midrabanan, but if it's, let's say, something that needs to be inside a keli, you haven't yet completed the job, then it becomes one unit. So now we're up to the Gemara 4 lines of top. Tainach, all of this makes sense. Soilis, when it comes to flour. Toidus, when it comes to incense. Ulavoina, when it comes to the frankincense. Ma'yikalamen, what do you say over there? What do you say over there? Rabbi Akiva clearly says the Rabbanon, and Rab Chanin said that anything to do with kachim is Torah. Gary, we're just going what we did on Friday. So 5 lines on the top of Chavdal and Amar Aleph. Amar Nachman, Amar Rabbi, you know what we're talking about here? It's only Midrab. Rabbi Akiva is talking about Midrabbanon. Our Mishnah is talking about a normal case, it's Mehat Torah. Why in Rabbi Akiva's case is the Rabbanon? In order for a vessel to become Tameh, you need that it should have a toich, it should be concave, it should have a cavity that you can place things inside. We're talking about over here in Rabbi Akiva's case, it was just a flat, let's say, piece of leather. And because of the flat piece of leather, it's not mekabel tumah. So it's not considered a keli. Therefore, from the Torah's perspective, we don't combine everything there and treat it as one unit. It's only from the Rabbanon. You're going, for example, that you put it on a flat plate. There, rice, according to the Torah, yesh like a spoon. If it has something you can put inside a receptacle, mitzad, it combines everything together. Ein like if it has no spoon flat, ein a mitzad doesn't combine everything together. But also Rabbanon, Akiva came along and said, the rabbis also went ahead, but tiknu, and they started, even though it has no receptacle, it combines everything and treats it as one unit. So therefore, Rab Chanin holds that our Mishnah is not a contradiction of Akiva. He's talking about a case where it's only the Rabbanon, there's no real tumah from the Torah, it's flat, let's say tabletop, whatever, made out of leather. But over here, we're talking about where there's a kaf, there's a spoon, and therefore everything inside that spoon becomes one from the Torah. Says that's all good. So you reconciled Rabbi Akiva and our Mishnah. There's no argument there. But a pliga, you should know that what you're saying now argues that Rab Chanin as Rab Chanin is arguing Rab Chiva Rabba. What's the story? From the testimony of Rabbi Akiva, Nishnis Mishnah, he said that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva that it's only midrabanan. You, Rab Chanin, said that our Mishnah is talking about that everything inside the spoon becomes one that is Mahatayra. Our he made a comment that our Mishnah is based on Rabbi Akiva, who said that it's only midrabanan, and therefore the idea that everything inside one cup becomes one is only midrabanan. So they have an argument. Okay, Gemara. It says in the Mishnah by Truma we go up to the third generation, right? So you have Avia Vaisa Tuma, a corpse. You have Ava Tuma, which somebody touches a corpse, or if someone's a Nida or a Zav, or if a Sheretz is Ava Tuma, and if a person touches any of these, they become Tuma, they become a Rishon. And a Rishon Tuma can only contaminate food and drink, not a person and not Kelim. That's by Chulin. By Truma, there's one more layer, it can become a Shlishi. By Kachim, there's one more layer, become a Revi. There's an argument if Kachim, in order for Kachim to become a Revi, do they need to touch Kachim that's a Shlishi? Or even if they touch Truma, which is a Shlishi, makes Kachim a Revi. But anyway, the Gemara's question is going to be, how do we know? So the Gemara Tanya, we learned, how do you know the Revi B'Kodesh Shehu Pasal? How do you know that the Revi B'Kodesh is possible? No, it sounds like we're saying Mahatayra. How do you know that by Kachim it goes another generation, a fourth? Says the Gemara, V'dinu, it's a logical thing, it's a Kavachem. And goes as follows. We know that, let's say, a woman who had a child or a nida or a male zav, they have to go through a number of days, or somebody who's tummy mace, they go through a number of days. Sorry, a nida and a zav and a yoledis, and then at the end they go to mikveh, then they wait for the sun to set. And for truma, that's good enough. You can go eat truma like the first Mishnah Bracha said. But if you want to eat kabbanis, you have to, tomorrow morning, you have to bring your carbon, they have to bring a carbon. So Kolzman, you didn't bring the carbon that you meant to bring, you're not allowed to eat from other kachim, other kabbanis, until you bring that. And now, by truma, sunset is good enough. To eat kachim, you have to bring your carbon. So what do we see from here? What's stricter? Kachim is stricter than truma. So we make a kavachem as follows. Truma, we know, goes to a third generation. Truma, we know that a shlishi is the end of the line, and it becomes tummy as well. And we learn that in Marasaita from a kavachem. So now that we know that truma goes to shlishi, and kachim is stricter than truma, so kachim should go to revi. Simple logic. Says Gemara, if a person who did not bring a carbon, truma, they're still allowed to eat truma as the sun sets. Yet pasul, they're mutter betruma. Was there a dollar over there? A paisel. Yet the din is a what? Paisel be kodesh. We know that kodesh. So we do a truma pasul. We know that mechusik kipurim that is allowed to eat truma. Yet it's pasul the kodesh. Kodesh you cannot eat, right? You cannot eat until you bring a carbon. Shlishi shepasul b'truma. So shlishi, which says that a truma becomes a shlishi, ain't surely which kachim is stricter than truma. Surely she has to be the kodesh. Surely that you should by kodesh you should add another layer and make it a revi. Says the Gemara, with Chav Daled and Aleph, we're just learning how do you know that there is a revi by kodesh, and how you know that it's possible. So if truma, which is more lenient than kodesh, has a shlishi and kachim restricted, it should go to revi. Now, v'lamadu shlishi lekodesh min hatayra, and how do you know that kachim has a din of shlishi? You're telling me that kachim has a din of shlishi, therefore the kavachem is coming to add another layer or revi. How do you know that? But revi bekavachem, he said yes. Shlishi lekodesh hatayra. How do you know shlishi hatayra? Benayin the chsiv is a pasuk. It says a pasuk v'habasa, the flesh of a carbon. Chagigah b'chol tamei comes in contact with anything that's tamei. Lo ya'achol. Now in the Torah, in the Gemara, we have that something is tamei means that not only is it tamei, but it's a verb also that it has the capacity to transfer that tumah to something else as well. Pasul means is the end of the line. That's what pasul means. Over here, however, we in the Torah there's no such thing as pasul. In the Torah, everything is tamei, and the pasuk says if a carbon touches anything which is tamei, which includes a sheni by chulin, is lo yachol. So it tells you clearly that kachim touches a sheni, you cannot eat it because it becomes a shlishi. So the Torah clearly tells us about a shlishi. Mila asking, are we talking about the Naga B'Sheni, that the carbon touched the Sheni, because it says any tummy, including the Sheni. Don't eat, which means that what? That the carbon becomes a Shlishi. Is Revi, and how do you know that Revi? Revi, therefore, by Kachim, we have a Kal Chaymer, we got to go one more step. The Kal Chaymer was that we know that Kachim is stricter than Truma, because by Truma, as soon as the sun sets, you can go ahead and eat Truma, and by Kachim, you cannot eat from Kachim until you bring a carbon as well. Now, we have a rule. We're in Chov Daled on an Aleph. We're by the 2 dots, about 10 lines from the bottom of the page. And it begins, we're up to there, with Truma Imnit Mas. We have a rule that by a Kal Chaymer, Dayoy Lova Min Adin Lias Kanad. It means like by Miriam, when she slandered Moshe Rabbeinu for leaving his wife. And the Abisha there said that, if you would have spat on your father, you would be locked up for 7 days. So surely when you're embarrassing the Shekhinah, you should be locked up. So L'chayli should be locked up for 14 days, much more than if you embarrass your father. Nevertheless, we only locked up for 7 days. Why? Because the Kal Chaymer, you're learning B from A. Even though B is stricter than A, that's how Kal Chaymer works, but you cannot increase the halacha by B more than you from A, because you're learning from A. Since A was locked up for 7 days, so B, Miriam also was locked up for 7 days. The question is as follows. You're learning from Truma that Kachim should go become Tamei. But Truma, it only goes to a Shlishi. How in the world can you learn that Kachim should go to Revi? Where does Revi come from? You're learning from Truma, but Truma doesn't have the concept of Revi. So we have one school of thought that says that if the Kal Chaymer is going to be undermined, in other words, we don't need to learn that Kachim is a Shlishi, we have a Pasuk. If you have a Kal Chaymer, what's a Kal Chaymer coming to, what information is it providing for us, other than the fact, it must be just teaching us something new. Must be, in this case, we have no choice but a Revi. Because if you're going to say you can't learn more than where you originally came from, then there's nothing to learn from the Kal Chaymer. So therefore, this Kal Chaymer is valid, it's from the Torah. There's another school of thought, in the Gemara, not here, but other places, that says that no, even if you undermine the Kal Chaymer, you cannot learn from a Kal Chaymer more than your original case that you are learning from. And therefore, by Kachim Revi, where do you learn it from? From Truma, but Truma only goes to Shlishi. So therefore, they hold that it's only Midrabanan. This that Kachim goes to Revi is only a Chumra Midrabanan. Our Gemara here seems to be learning that it's from the Torah. Okay, let's continue. It said in our Mishnah, there's a difference between Truma and Kachim, that by Truma, if one hand, let's say we have a rule that your hands are always considered a sheni, but if you wash them and you're constantly minding them, then your hands are tar. But then if you touched, let's say your right hand touched a sheni l'tumah. So your hand now becomes a sheni l'tumah as far as Kachim is concerned. If your hand becomes as far as a Kachim is concerned, your hand becomes tamei, becomes a sheni, not as far as Truma. Sorry. As far as Truma is concerned, your right hand became tamei. Only your right hand is tamei. Your right hand is a sheni. You touch Truma, it becomes a shlishi. But as far as Kachim is concerned, if your right hand becomes tamei, both hands become tamei, and you need to immerse your hands. You have to tevel both hands. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to talk about that. Okay, let's go. The general rule is if you touch a dead body with your finger, your whole body becomes tummy. Any tumah from the Torah that you touch, your whole body becomes tummy. But if you touch a tumah which is midrabanan, only the hand that touched it becomes tummy, and not the rest of your body. Okay, not the rest of your body. So we say over here in the Mishnah says over here that by truma, if one of your hands become tummy, your other hand remains tar. But by kodesh, if one hand becomes tummy, you have to tevel both hands. And we said because the right hand is metame, the left hand by kodesh, but not by truma. That's what the Mishnah says. So now the Gemara will explain. Come on, Rav Shizbi says he qualifies as din. He said, "Truma nikmat." Rav Shizbi says, "Bechibudin shani." Do you know what the logic behind this is? If your right hand became tummy, why does your left hand automatically become tummy? I'll tell you. He says, it's talking about over here that while your right hand touched your left hand, you know when your left hand was touching kachim. Your left hand was touching kachim. You're not touching the kachim with your right hand, which is tummy. That's what I'm talking about. You took your right hand and you touch your left hand. We are scared that that you next time, or even now, while your right hand is touching your left hand, because your left hand is touching the kachim, your right hand might move and touch the kachim as well. And your right hand is a sheni, he touches the kachim and make it tummy. That's why we will go by kachim, that if your right hand touches your left hand, it is tummy, because and if your left hand is touching kachim at the same time. But if it's not touching kachim, then it's not tummy at all. Says the Gemara. We're talking about when to say one hand is makes the other hand tummy. That while your hand, your right hand, let's say, is touching your left hand, which is tired, your left hand was touching kachim at the same time. So Rabban were worried that maybe your right hand will end up touching kachim as well. Avol, it's only a chumrah, it's only a gzera. Avol shalei b'chibura, and if let's say your left hand is not touching any kachim at the time, so your right hand touches the left hand, and 10 minutes later you go ahead and touch kachim, it doesn't with your left hand, it does not become tummy at all. Your hand does not make your left hand even a shlishi, nothing. Says the Gemara, I have a question. It says yad neguva. Let's say your hand is dry. So there's because we have a rule, we said before, that if mashkin touches a sheni, we made a special gezeda that mashkin becomes a rishon, and that is because there is the saliva of a nida, the saliva of a zav, which is an avatuma. So we will geyser that all mashkin should become tummy. So if your hand is a sheni, and there's mashkin on it, then the mashkin becomes a rishon. And if you touch your other hand, of course your other hand becomes a sheni, just like your first hand, because it touched a rishon. So it says in the Brisa as follows: if your hand is dry, your right hand is dry, let's say your hand that's tummy is dry, yad neguva, metame chavata, and then your right hand touched your left hand, it's metame lekodesh, avloy letruma. It's metame your left hand, that your left hand becomes like your right hand, it becomes a sheni, and if you then touch kachim, the kachim become a shlishi, so the kachim actually become tummy, because they have the capacity to then pass it on to another stage. That's called tummy. But not for truma. Truma, we don't go any further. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rabbi Yehuda says your right hand made your left hand into a shlishi, because your right hand is a sheni. You touch your left hand as a shlishi, and if your left hand touches kachim, it becomes a revi. It becomes the end of the line. That's called pasuk. Says Abai. Now he explains the question. Why are you highlighting the fact that the right hand is dry? Now remember, if when it comes to kachim, everything in order to become tamei has to be wet, or your hand, if you want your hand to be able to pass on tumah, it has to be wet. But when it comes to kachim, we have a rule: chibas hakodesh. The fact that it's so desirable means that you don't have to make it wet to prepare it for tumah, and your hand, even though it's dry, it passes on tumah. So our questions are like this. And if you can tell me that if your right hand touches your left hand, even though it's not touching kachim, not like Abshizbi, it makes your other hand tamei. That's a chiddush. That even though your right hand is dry, no, if your right hand is wet, there's no big deal. So your left hand, the water on your right hand becomes a rishon, touches the left hand, your left hand becomes a sheni, equal to your right hand. The chiddush is your right hand is dry. There's no kachim around, but if your right hand touches your left hand now becomes a sheni like your right hand, according to Rebbe. And then if you touch kachim afterwards, there's a problem, only for kachim. So it makes sense. But you're going to follow up Shizbi. The whole problem is that your left hand is touching kachim, and we're worried that your right hand will move and touch the kachim itself. As far as kachim is concerned, we don't care if it's wet or dry. So why talk about dry hand? What's the relevance here that if it's dry? Because when it comes to kachim, it makes no difference. Your hand is dry and not dry. So even when it's dry, if you're touching kachim, it becomes tamei. So that's his proof. Shizbi is wrong. Says the Gemara Itmar. Some want to say that this is a new halacha, nothing to do with previous Gemara. Some want to say it's a continuation. Itmar, we learned. He says, "Lo yishanu el yodei." It's only talking about your own hand. You're saying your right hand touches your left hand. When it comes to kachim, your left hand becomes tamei. Even though your right hand is a sheni, it makes your left hand a shlishi. As far as kachim is concerned, it's a chumrah. But if you're touching your friend's hand, then nothing is going on. And Rabbi Yechonah says, "Echad yodoi ve'echad yad chaver." Rabbi Yechonah says, whether it's your own hand, you're touching your left hand, whether you touch your friend's hand, but oisa yad, as long as you touch it with original talmudic hand, I mean your right hand, your left hand is only a chumrah. your right hand is real tummy, sheni, is what? Lifts tummy. What does it do? It makes that your friend's hand becomes a shlishi, or your left hand becomes a shlishi, and if it touches kachim, it becomes a revi, and that's the end of the line. Now, how do we know even if you touch a friend's hand, we're going to be machmir? Mishnah sort of repeats itself. It says that if you touch, that if you're that your right hand by truma is if you one hand is tummy by truma, that's all remains tummy. You only have to wash that hand, and by kachim you have to immerse both hands, and then the Mishnah continues because by kachim one hand passes on to the other, but not by truma. Why mention again, but not by truma? You already told us that. So the Gemara, so he explains. Seifa says, "Hayad metama chava tolakaydes." Your right hand can be metama, another hand. As far as kachim are concerned, I will lay the truma, not for truma. Hasulamali l'chayda. What do you need this for? Hatana le'reisha l'chayda. What do you need it for? Didn't we already learn that by kachim your hand is metama, the other hand, and truma doesn't? And Rav Shimon wants to teach you that not only by kachim your right hand is metama, your left hand. By kachim your right hand is metama, someone else's hand. The hand of your friend. Shlokish changed his mind and agreed with Rabbi Yochanan that you can also, this chumrah even applies to your hand, the friend of your hand. That whether it's your hand, whether it's your friend's hand, as long as the original hand that became tamei that touches your friend's hand, what does it do? The hand becomes a shlishi, so if it touches kachim, they become a revi, which is the end of the line, which is pas. Says the Gemara, this concept, the lifsala tamei, this question, when your right hand touches your left hand, does your left hand take on the same status as the right hand? Is that part of the chumrah? It means your left hand now is a sheni also. So when it touches kachim, the kachim becomes a shlishi, becomes tamei. Or your left hand is a step lower, is a grade lower. So your right hand is a sheni, your left hand is a shlishi, and if you touch kachim, it becomes a revi. In fact, that is Tanoi. It's an argument Tanoi. It's now we learned Kol HaPoisul B'Truma, any a sheni, which makes truma. Posul, right? Makes truma shlishi is metame yadayim, makes your hands tame. If you touch a sheni, your hand becomes tame. As far as liya shniya is, and the yad metame chavat, and one hand is metame the other hand. Give it Rabbi Shua. So Rabbi Shua says your one hand is metame the other hand. Sounds like the left hand has the same status as the right hand. Tame. The Chachamim say yadayim shniya say no. Your hand sachakel is only a shniya, but ain't sheni ois a sheni. When your right hand touches your left hand, a sheni does not make a sheni. Does not make a sheni even by kachim. My love. So we understood that in principle everybody agrees that your left hand becomes tamei, but you meant to say is it doesn't becomes a shlishi, not a sheni. So when it touches kachim, they become a revi. My love, sheni d'lavid, hashlishi avid. So the chayda we see from here that this is actually machlekes tanaim, whether your left hand remains a sheni and therefore it makes kachim a shlishi, or whether your left hand becomes a shlishi and therefore it makes kachim a revi. So that's no proof. Dilma, maybe they argue the whole principle. Maybe they don't believe in this chumrah that if one hand touches the other hand, it becomes tamei. Dilma lo sheni avid lo shlishi avid. Neither.
Is there a difference?
Hello. Tihani Tanoi, like the following tonight. Tani, we learned Yad Neguva. We already had this a few minutes ago. A dry hand, metame is chavata. Your hand is dry, still metame. The other hand to do what? Letame b'kodesh. Clearly, the Rebbe says that what? That your hand becomes your left hand becomes a sheni, and it touches something. It becomes the kachim become tamei. They become a shlishi, and they can pass on the tumah further. Avalei l'tumah, but not by tumah. Give Rebbe. Yehuda says, no, your left hand becomes a shlishi. And when it does a kachim, all it does is it makes a kachim a revi, makes it puzzle. Then the Mishnah continued, you're allowed to eat dry food with tamadika hands, because your hand is a sheni. When it comes to truma, your hand is a sheni, and we're not going to be, and because it's dry, since it's dry, the food never became prepared, ready to become tamei. Even though by truma we know it goes to a shlishi, but since the food is not wet, the food didn't become wet, so it's never prepared. It's not susceptible to tumah. So therefore, you can eat truma with dry hands. However, you cannot eat kachim, because by kachim makes no difference if it's dry or it's not dry. Says the Gemara. Let's analyze that. Is there such a thing When it comes to kachim, it makes absolutely no difference whether the hands are dry or not dry. You're not allowed to eat kachim, because by kachim, the fact that we desire kachim so much, that in itself prepares the kachim to be eaten, which means it's now susceptible to tumah. The very fact that it's kodesh makes it so special, and that in itself prepares it. So what's the relevance of dry and not dry when it comes to kachim? Says the Gemara. So therefore, what's the Mishnah teaching us a din? Everyone knows when it comes to kachim, if your hands are tummy, you're not allowed to eat kachim. And it doesn't matter whether it's dry and not dry, it doesn't help. Everyone knows that. What's the Mishnah come to tell you something which is obvious or everybody knows? Says the Gemara, teach you that it's an interesting case. If you're going, for example, if somebody else stuck down your mouth, kachim. Or you should talk about you yourself stuck it down. The toothpick or something, or a piece of twig. Or let's say you took a fork. So you're not touching the kachim. You're not touching the kachim, so the kachim don't become tummy. Ubikesh lechel. Let's say a wooden fork. Ubikesh lechel. What happened was you're eating kachim. It doesn't become tummy, even though your hand is tummy, because someone else put it into your mouth. So no problem. But then you want to go ahead and eat a radish. You want to eat a radish, you want to eat an onion of chulin, imahen, together with them. Now, your hands are a sheni. Chulin doesn't go beyond the sheni. So therefore, nothing happens to the chulin. If you put the chulin in your mouth, technically, the chulin doesn't do anything to the kachim, because the chulin did not become tummy. Because your hands are a sheni, and a sheni cannot make chulin tummy at all. But nevertheless, Chacham didn't want you to do that. Why? Because we're worried that maybe your tummy hands will move a little bit and touch the kachim that's in your mouth. The kodesh gazabu rabbanon truma rabbanon. Kodesh, we're worried, but regarding truma, we are not worried. Even though your hand is a sheni, and if it touches truma, it turns it into shlishi. We know that you're going to be careful, and that for truma, that's good enough. For kachim, we have to be more stringent. The Mishnah said, if somebody's an oinen, or somebody is a mechusik Purim, so an oinen is somebody who's a close member passed away, they're not allowed to eat any kachim until the oinen is over. A mechusik Purim is somebody who had to go and do mikveh and wait for sunset, and the following day bring a carbon to end whatever they were doing. Let's say a woman gave birth, or a zava, and then they can always participate in kachim. So the rule is that after they bring the carbon, they got to go to mikveh again. Even though you went yesterday, you got to go to mikveh again before you can start eating kabbalas. The question is why? So well, my time, what's the reason? Kivin not eating. So one answer is kivin, because the ada idna have asiri. Until now, you were not allowed to eat from kachim. Atzechinu rabbanon tefillah. So before you can start eat kachim again, you have to go through the mikveh. Mishnah. So in the previous Mishnah, we learned there were 11 chumras that kachim have. We learned there were 11 chumras that kachim have over truma. Now we're going to learn that there are what do you call it? Some chumras that of truma over kachim. What's that? We already learned before, when it comes to kachim, if an Amoritz brings wine, donates wine or oil to the Beis Hamikdash, we'll accept it. If they tell us it's Torah, we'll accept it. Because otherwise, it'll be so divisive that they're going to just turn away and build their own Beis Hamikdash, build their own mizbeches in the backyard, and we don't want that to happen. But when it comes to truma, if we don't trust the Torah, it's not a problem. They'll go, they have plenty of friends, kind of, the Amoritz will think, look, I'm prepared to give you truma. You don't want it? No problem. I got plenty of friends out there who are Amoratz and Kohanim, and they'll take it from me. So therefore, we don't worry about truma. So truma, we're going to be strict. We're not going to accept it from Amoritz, but kachim we will. So now the Mishnah says that even truma, sometimes we will accept it. It goes as follows. There's a chumra, but truma. Israel is divided into 3 regions. You have Yehuda, which is Yerushalayim. You have the Galil, the northern Israel, and then you have Ever Yard, on the other side of Jordan. So chayme betruma should be Yehuda ne'emanin, only in this section of Yehuda. They believe, these Amoratzim are believed, al taharis yaim v'shemra. They tell us that this wine that they want to donate to the Beis Hamikdash for kabbanas or oil is Torah. We'll trust them. Kol yemei sashana, the entire year. If they set it aside for the mizbech, but according to Rashi, only if they set it aside at a certain time, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But others say even the rest of the year as well. Uvishas hagit, when it comes to truma, uvishas hagitas v'habadim, when the time when it's the season when they go ahead and they press the grapes and they press the olives, that's when they sell it. The bulk of the trade is taking place at that time. Is then the Amoratzi want to do business, and we want Amoratzi to do business, because then most of the manufacturers are Amoratzi. Talmidei Chacham are sitting and learning. So therefore, we made it easy for them. the Waratzim will want to make sure that they're Torah, they can do good business, and we trust them. So Afala Truma, that's the only time we trust them for Truma. If it's during the season when the bulk of the trade is done. The rest of the year, we don't rely on their Tahara. So we see that Kachim, we rely the entire year. When it comes to Truma, only the season when you press the grapes and you press the olives. According to Rashi, even Kachim, we trust them the whole year, is only if they tell us that the wine that they're using for Kachim, or the oil, was taken from that season at that time, when, during the season for pressing, squeezing the wine and the grapes.
Oil and wine the same?
Sorry?
Oil and wine is the same.
It's different seasons, but it's only whenever that season is. That's when wine is a few seasons a year, 3 seasons a year. It's different seasons. But the point is, when is the season? And let's say 80 and 90% of all the deals are done then. So the Avaratz want to make sure they're in the business, and we want to make sure they're in the business. So they're going to make sure, I will see the Mishnah in a minute, that all the vessels that they use, everything that they use is 100% Torah. Says more further, let's say the season went by, if they bring then a barrel of wine and say, here's Truma, we'll take it, because we don't trust that they made it in a pure way. So what does Amaras do? He wants to give it to a Chacham. So interesting. He can keep it for the next season. There were 3 seasons a year. He can keep it for the next season, and then produce it. And it doesn't matter that and then sell it. Even it doesn't matter that we know it's produced somewhere in between. It wasn't done the right season. But if they know that they cannot sell it, generally they're going to be more careful and do it right. The Imam, but if the Amaretz adds and he says, he frashti letoichei is kodesh, that I also, when I did all my wine pressing or my olive pressing, I also set aside a little bit for kachim. That tells us that the entire lot must be pure. If we trust him for kachim, it doesn't make sense. We trust him for kachim, we're not going to trust him for truma. When kachim, generally, we're much more serious, much more careful. So we have no choice but to accept then the truma as well. So if they say Ifrash is kodesh, we've also put in a little bit of kodesh there. Neman, he's believed completely. Because since you believe on kodesh, you believe on the truma. What about kadiyayim and kadishemen? Barrels of wine and barrels of oil, hamadumais are mixed up. Mixed up right now, we think means, you have it's tevel, which means tevel is mixed up. There's chul in there, there's truma, it's all mixed together. You haven't yet set aside the truma. Is a nemani malay again, because there's truma there. When do we trust them? Only in the seasons when you trust truma. When you press over there the grapes or the olives. Now, how much in advance of that season do they prepare themselves? They have to get the barrels and everything else. Is the koidim legita shivim yom, that they start making sure that everything they have is 70 days prior to the season, they do everything right. And therefore you can start already buying from them because you know they did it all right.